Welcome to another episode of Progress, Potential, and Possibilities, discussions with fascinating people designing a better tomorrow for all of us. I'm your host, Ira Pastor.
Welcome, everybody, again to another episode of the show. Today, bringing another really fascinating guest involved in science and technology, creating a better tomorrow for all of us. We are honored today to be joined on the show by Dr. Mark Lloyd Davies, who is the global head for the Strategic Partnerships and Resource Group at Johnson & Johnson. There he leads a global team at J&J that is involved in forging these really novel strategic public-private partnerships, securing collaborations that accelerate groundbreaking R&D, advancing strategies to widen access to care for patients and healthcare systems, and ultimately, as they say, unlock possibilities to transform lives. Dr. Davies has built a distinguished career at this really interesting intersection of science, of policy, of global health strategy. Before this current role, Dr. Davies held a number of senior leadership positions within J&J, instrumental in shaping various external engagement strategies, guiding policy development in areas ranging from pharmaceutical innovation to public health preparedness, and leading various strategic initiatives like the J&J Lung Cancer Initiative, which we'll be talking a little bit about later. Dr. Davies was previously the chair of the MedTech Europe Research and Innovation Committee, working on the evolution of various EU-funded the Innovative Medicine Initiative, as well as he spent time at Sanofi involved in various external affairs initiatives. Interesting, he holds a Ph.D. from the University of Amsterdam in climate change, physical geography, and geology. His undergraduate degree in biology and geography or sciences from the University of London, UK. And we are honored to have him with us. I'm really looking forward to a very wide and varied conversation today on some topics that we don't normally get into. Dr. Mark Lloyd Davies, thank you so much for taking time to come on the show.
Well, thank you. My pleasure. Thank you for the invitation. It's great to be here.
Yeah, it's wonderful having you. Would love to start off. I mean, we have actually had guests that have put a foot in Antarctica in the past, but your background, specifically your PhD in studying, everything going on and the glaciation of South Victoria Land and how cold and warm glaciers interplay and all sorts of topics. Take us back a little bit, Mark. What took you in this direction, and talk a little bit about some of the key lessons you took away from hanging out in Antarctica for a while.
Yeah. It was an amazing experience. I mean, it's goes back a while now, but I've always been interested in science and curiosity and exploration. And there's the opportunity to apply for a scholarship at the University of Amsterdam, which would have at least 2 field seasons down in Antarctica. And I was really attracted by that. And my professor at the University of London said, I think you should apply, you've got a good shot. I did, and I was awarded the scholarship. And going to Antarctica, it's incredible. Firstly, everyone knows it's extremely cold, but few people know it's also incredibly windy most of the year, highly arid. So to give you an idea, the aridity in the base camps, all the machinery like a computer or a printer all have tin foil on it to do a static electricity shock to destaticize yourself because of the aridity that you build up. And it's a very unique environment in that way. And when you're planning also to go out into the field, onto the ice sheets or into the mountains, your pre-planning needs to be like double, triple checked, because you're taken often out by helicopter, and your helicopter hours is the biggest chunk of your budget. And if you get to where you're going and you suddenly realize, I forgot this tool or this bit of equipment, you suddenly, hemorrhaged your budget because you can only get it by getting a helicopter to come back again and bring it. So all that pre-planning really important. And collaboration is key as well because you're working with field staff, medical staff, search and rescue staff. We had to dial in every morning, every evening to let them know we were alive and well. If you don't do that for 24 hours, you send out a search and rescue party. So it's a very different dynamic to what you might be used to otherwise, but a great experience and, an amazing continent as well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and and as we get to some other austere, let's say, environments, we'll be talking about a little later on. We'll apply some of those learnings, but no, very interesting nonetheless. So after earning your PhD, you leave Antarctica. You, as I mentioned in the bio, you take on a range of roles, both in pharma and med tech, each which came with their own unique challenges and opportunities. And one of these, which is quite interesting, and I think this is sort of first where this sort of theme of large scale public-private partnerships comes into play, was your involvement in an organization that was involved in this innovative medicine initiative, now known as sort of the innovative health initiative, but
Mm.
really a major foray in bringing together players from the pharma industry, from academia, from various patient organizations. Take us back a little bit to some of these experiences, share some of the pivotal moments, and if you could talk a little bit about, I guess, some of your initial learnings and sort of your first public-private partnership and what was involved there, and what was a rather sizable EU program. We'd love to hear about that.
Yeah. Well, so take IHI or IMI as it used to be called, it's just sort of one example of a public-private partnership, but it's a good exemplar in many ways. And where IHI plays a really helpful role, and actually public-private partnerships generally, is that there are certain, if you think about the ecosystem that you operate in as a pharmaceutical industry or medtech industry, there are certain opportunities for improvement, to improve innovation, to get innovation to patients faster, that no one company can do alone. So, for example, take the regulatory environment. If you want to improve regulatory standards for pediatric care, or if you want to find ways of how can AI play a better role to get faster regulatory approval, no one company can put their hand up and say, we'll do
Right.
this alone, and nor can an agency. And so a public-private partnership like IHI is a perfect mechanism where you can bring together the different stakeholders involved to say, collectively, how can we sort of improve a better outcome in the regulatory environment or in the research environment for a particular disease or in the market access environment. So this is a way where public-private partnerships, just one example, can make a major difference and impact. In the case of IHI, it's also quite an interesting model where it's one of the few public-private partnerships where the idea comes from industry.
Okay.
Normally, they will come from government research agencies and be put forward towards industry. So industry brings forward the ideas. They contribute their in-kind resources, their capital, their assets, their people, their time, their expertise, and then that is quantified, and that quantification is then funded with dollars and euros as funding for the project itself. So individual companies don't receive those sums of money. The money just goes into the central pot to run the project.
Mm-hmm.
So that's quite an interesting mechanism in that respect. And I think it's a real opportunity. I mean, if you look back at the beginning of IMI, which is over a decade now, you've had
Mm-hmm.
IMI 1, then IMI 2, and now it's called IHI, and the medtech industry is part of that as well. We can go back and look at all the different projects which have happened and some of the major impacts they have had. And sometimes it's important in public-private partnerships. People, they make a difference, they change the environment, they change the ecosystem for the better, and then everyone assumes that's the new normal that's been the case forever. But it wasn't. It was the public-private partnership that helped shape that change to begin with. And I think there's an opportunity for us to tell that story more and to get that story out there.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Um, Mark, from that experience, you move into Johnson and Johnson, and you're involved, prior to the current role, in several positions in government affairs and med tech. strategic initiatives, and ultimately this current role as global head of the Strategic Partnerships and Resource Group. I'd love if you could sort of just introduce a little bit of what the group's all about today.
Yeah, and when I talk about the Strategic Partnerships and Resource Group, SPRG, I have the privilege of leading at J&J. Essentially, what we do as a group is we help R&D teams in both pharmaceuticals and in medtech access highly valuable assets in the public domain to help them advance and accelerate their research and development programs. And these are assets which we don't own internally. They're not already there. If they were, we would use those. Or they are assets which you can't purchase or buy via business development or acquisition. So what would be examples of that? Well, if you think about large agency-owned federated data sets or large biobank data sets, these are truly deeply valuable to R&D programs, and they are often owned by government research agencies, and we can help provide access to that through public-private partnerships. Other examples will be cutting-edge human academic talent. There are professor labs around the world working on exactly the same problems and challenges and issues we are, and a public-private partnership can give us the opportunity to work with our postdocs and PhDs and labs and get learnings and insights, and we can support them by having the resources to execute and scale findings, etc. So it's a real win-win partnership. There's also biological tissues and samples, or in the case of like the lung research I was mentioning, human lung organoids that we would need to access to prepare for clinical trials and research and work. We don't own that, so we can't go and buy that, but through a public-private partnership we can have access. So this is the strategically significant role of public-private partnerships to help advance R&D. And I think it's a real competitive edge that J&J is kind of double downing and investing in this space.
And if we look at some of the major public-private partnerships that have occurred in recent years, obviously Operation Warp Speed comes to mind, of course, during COVID. We profiled things like CARB-X in terms of antimicrobial resistance. Some of these things obviously fall into your lap because there's an extremely pressing need, and in the case of Operation Warp Speed, we got to develop a vaccine pretty fast because we got this unknown virus and so forth. In other cases, obviously, it can take some time and be a little more selective. I sort of looked through at some of the different types of partnerships that J&J has been involved in, everything from sort of HIV vaccine development. You've done some interesting programs with nursing and community health. Talk a little bit about ultimately how organizations go about identifying the best public-private partnerships, like, as J&J does. And you mentioned some of the competitive advantages. Hey, we're pretty good at med tech. We're pretty good at creating drugs. But J&J is, a really huge organization. I'm sure you got things in the consumer health world and diagnostics and everything else that you bring to bear here. Walk us through a little bit about that, because the innovation component, in terms of the innovation you bring in, but also what you already have as competitive advantage, is very important synergy there.
Yeah, no, great, fantastic question. To do this really well, you need to be intentional about it. So what do I mean by that? We have an amazing team in our group called Focus Area Leaders, and these leaders engage with senior R&D leaders in different therapeutic areas or different medtech domains of research, and get to understand their strategy and their needs and their goals and objectives, and begin to understand, what is it that you're missing? What is it that you are looking for that could really accelerate this project or de-risk this project? And invariably, it'll be something where they say, we don't own it, we don't have it internally, and I can't go out and buy it on the market, but I need this. I need this quantum computing expert, or I need this data source of 100,000 patients from a heterogeneous population, verified, qualified data source. And it would be typically examples like that. And when we're intentional in building these strategic relationships and understanding those needs, we can then say to them, we can either go, and then we do this sort of scouting for different types of public-private partnerships, which are being advertised by different research agencies around the world, particularly in Europe or the US, or through initiatives like the IHI, help create one from the bottom up. And this is we have found the most effective way to kind of get best return on investment and value from it. Understand the research strategy, understand the gaps, and recognize we don't haven't got them internally, we can't go and buy them, but we can find them through public-private partnerships. And then we go seeking from there. And that is the way that you get the best return on investment, the best value from the approach. So it's that internal alignment with R&D. Sometimes we do have R&D leaders who say, hey, I've got an idea, I've seen something, can you help me in the application process? So sometimes that does happen, of course. But a lot of the time, and on a really good day or a good week, it's that kind of almost internal consulting and advising, oh, we know where we can go and look for that and create this partnership that will meet that need.
Excellent. And it's interesting because you mentioned a bit about this in terms of some of the other external stakeholders here, and whether that may be a regulator, and if you're just bringing up quantum computing, if you show up with some quantum computing device, hey, regulators have not seen this thing, and it's going to take a while to figure out how to regulate it. Industry partners, when you're dealing with something really difficult and you need to bring together, I'll say some dirty words, Pfizer and Glaxo, whomever, in a consortium, that's not traditional. It might be a little difficult to deal with a group like that. And obviously the public and patients. And clearly we're in this very unique era of public trust and questioning everything that the pharma industry is doing and all that. Talk a little bit about your engagement with external stakeholders and ultimately, advice that you would offer to others that are doing the same of, how do you get this thing right and it doesn't take too long to get done.
Yeah, no, a great question. I think so. Firstly, the partners you select, particularly if there aren't competitors, for example, or other stakeholders, it would need to be in the pre-competitive space. You wouldn't want to be doing a public-private partnership on an asset which is in phase 3 clinical trial and head to head. That wouldn't make sense in the pre-competitive space. Also, have some common sense, be wise of who you go seek out to select and want to partner with. And that's built from investment relationships and working together and trust being built up. But in terms of internal corporate capabilities, to which people often, companies which are, or organizations which are new to this, they underappreciate the value of good legal advice on the role of IP protection, the contracts you draft. So you need good legal advice with experienced attorneys in the area of public-private partnerships. And there are attorneys who know a lot about this space. And secondly, good project management. And the project management brings different stakeholders together, keep us on track, keep us working together. And those organizations who I see do very well in public-private partnerships have experienced attorneys who almost know. You almost don't need to show them the title of the science project. They can always guess these are going to be the things we're going to need to discuss regarding IP, contract, terms and conditions, etc. And then good project managers who can help advance the project going forward. And if you have those capabilities and invest in that, you'll get a lot of return on the PPP. I think organizations get a bit stuck or confused, either haven't got experienced legal counsel or are lacking project management capabilities as well.
Got it. So, Mark, at the beginning of the show, we talked about your time in Antarctica and a rather austere environment and living there. But let's go into another austere environment, and that is the one a couple hundred miles up there, namely space. And recently, there was a major announcement from J&J about the space day that you brought together various researchers from the life sciences, from NASA, ultimately to explore various opportunities in space science. And this has been a very interesting area for us as a show. We profiled some NASA folks. We profiled the Polaris Dawn SpaceX journey, where they're going to be studying radiation genomics and all that. A lot to learn in both directions, not just on how we keep astronauts safe from low gravity and radiation, all that, but all the learnings for things like accelerated aging and ultimately how the body resilience, robustness, and all that potentially impacted down here that are useful for various chronic degenerative diseases. take a little time to walk through why your group decided to enter the field, and ultimately what are some of the core opportunities that you see in the space biosciences in sort of driving forward patient care.
Yeah, no, great question. It's as I mentioned at the beginning, like going back to my PhD in Antarctica days, I've always been driven by that sense of curiosity and innovation,
Mm-hmm.
and I think it's a really important thing to continue that sort of mindset and that thinking to help advance our understanding. And and so the team had a great idea of like if we're looking at trying to think of innovative new ways to help advance life sciences, pharmaceutical research, medtech research, space partners could be a way for us to move and go into. And two data sources they picked up on is that government space agencies were increasing their research budgets in terms of life sciences, biology, understanding about sort of human welfare and extended periods in the space environment.
Mm-hmm.
But also, there's been an increase in private investment in space research as well
Yeah.
and space exploration. And so with the two combined, we thought bit of a challenge or a risk. Maybe this doesn't work out, but let's invite members of the space community and space agencies to our research campus in Beersen in northern Belgium and begin a bit of a dialogue and discussion to see what commonalities there may be or shared problems, opportunities. And out of this workshop, also day together, firstly, one thing that struck me, the space community culturally seemed very similar to the pharmaceutical and medtech research community.
Mm-hmm.
Um, they're very much comfortable with not knowing answers to everything, but excited about exploring new opportunities. And I think both communities are really used to doing lots of research, lots of work, and it not always working out every time, because that's often how innovation is within life sciences. And that was an interesting sort of observation of that sort of connectivity happening culturally between the two communities. And what struck me as an interest from the sort of space community is that the cost of space research is all about what they call payload. So it's all about getting objects from Earth into space.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously, human beings very expensive when you have to move a human being of X number of pounds into a zero gravity environment. Where, of course, a molecule, for example, is extremely light. So from a payload perspective, molecules are much more cost effective to get into space than, say, humans or kit or equipment.
Yeah.
And so this has sort of led to sort of interest in the space community, sort of seeing opportunities to partner with the life science and pharmaceutical community. And two areas sort of emerging of interest to us. One is understanding more about the role of thrombosis and blood clotting in the
Mm-hmm.
space in altered atmospheric environments, including a zero gravity or low gravity environment. And obviously, that's an area we research into as a company. So we're looking into that as a project. The other area of interest is because space has a zero gravity and zero sedimentation environment,
Mm-hmm.
crystallization is very different
Yeah.
in space. And so the drug discovery group are really interested in looking at some projects where we could look at crystallization experiments in a international space station, where essentially molecules could be like in a matchbox or a shoebox, and they're just circulating around the space station. And we can look at different crystallized structures that occur and take place in different lattice structures. And of course, this has consequences, positive consequences for drug stability, drug delivery, and there's a whole new area we could start looking into. So these sort of ideas started bubbling up. Another topic too, which was of interest, is in our medtech group. There's a whole team looking at how to do on-demand 3D printing in a
Mm.
confined space, which
Yeah.
of course is the operating room. But the other confined space where they want to do on-demand 3D printing is in space stations. So
Ah.
there's analogs there where there can be insights and learning from each other, because it's much more cost effective to get a 3D printing machine into space and then you print all your furniture, your equipment, your desk in space than have to send it all up to begin with. So these sort of ideas were coming up, which again was just fascinating illuminating and very encouraging.
Yeah. Yeah, that the 3D printing, right? A couple of years ago, we had Dr. Jeffrey Ling on the show, who was heading up the biologics department at DARPA, and at the time, he created these 3D printed drug technologies, where instead of, as you were just saying, instead of sending all the medicine up there, just 3D print them on demand, and yeah, this fits
Right.
so nicely in there. I love the the analogy there, but no, that's
Yeah.
beautiful work. I mean, it's again a really elegant example. Mark, one other the thing that I read about, and this came after the space science announcement, was an announcement about this really interesting global neurodegeneration proteomics consortium. Again, a really important example of public-private partnerships. Again, you probably have a lot of other things going on. Maybe some of this disclosed, some that are not, but take us a little beyond space. I mean, what other things do you have going on that you can talk about? If you can mention this one, because obviously Parkinson's and Alzheimer's, major unmet medical needs still, and it's nice to see that you're working here in the PPP model. But take us a little further, if you would, in some of the other things you're doing at the group.
Yeah. There's multiple different projects we work on across the whole organization. So J&J, we have about just over 180 public-private partnerships across all our different R&D programs we're working on. I can mention one which are the J&J External Innovation and Neurosciences team
Okay.
really led on and initiated, and we're now sort of supporting them in the sort of execution of it. And it's a project in the whole sort of neurodegeneration space, and it's with also the Gates Foundation and with Gates Ventures.
Got it.
And the title of the project is the Global Neurodegeneration Proteomics Consortium. And this is one where it's generated 250 million unique protein measurements from over 35,000 biosamples. So it's pulled together this huge, great big, large data source. And it's also a sort of a visual analysis. So there can be an idea of how cell morphology changes in response to drug treatment, which could become very powerful for both biomarkering and actually drug treatment itself. And there was a great article about this earlier this year in the Financial Times, but it is a lot of promise here that we could start to see strong inroads into the Alzheimer's dementia space because of projects like this. And this is, again, a classic case of a type of public-private partnership. It's bringing together third party, in this case, Gates Ventures and Gates Foundation, Johnson & Johnson and other initiatives to pull together a large data set, the sort of data set I mentioned you just can't go out and buy, or the sort of data set you don't own internally, but yet access to it can hugely advance your science and research. So that's one example to share with you. Another one, which we're sort of shaping through the IHI proposal, so this is an idea that we're sort of bringing forward, is with our epidemiology department in Johnson & Johnson. And this is looking at, there are lots of different aggregated data sets across Europe, and it's looking at how can you begin to bring them together, but then unify them from a quality control perspective, so that this is the same interpretation, the same labeling, the same structuring of that data. Because one of the challenges is, as more and more data is generated, how can you tell the quality control, if you like, of that data? And is the interpretation, labeling of that data the same from country X to country Y, or continent X to continent Y? So this is a project to try and say, if we start to federate and pull together data, can we ensure that it is structured in a consistent way so it can be interpreted? So when you pull the whole data together, there's much larger data set with confidence you can use it to interpret and make results from, etc. So it's a kind of a cataloging almost, and identification or taxonomy approach, if I can use that term, for data. But again, it's a sort of thing which requires lots of public agencies, because they own this data across Europe. It requires lots of companies who also own the data, and then it needs an alignment across academia, research agencies, and industry as to, okay, how do we quantify this, and then how do we describe it? And let's all agree that these are the standards and protocols by which we work with. So that's another project, for example, which will become be super important to scientists in the future. So when they look at that data, they can look at it with confidence. This is how it's described. This is how it is protocoled, and therefore we have confidence in how we can interpret it. That's another project to give you an example. I mentioned one other as I'm sort of talking about it, but there's interesting. We have a team in organic chemistry in the drug discovery group who are looking at. There's a particular challenge they have with the potassium channel in sort of cardiotoxic side effects,
Sure.
and they keep coming up against this time and time and time again. And there is a professor working at the University of London whose lab is dedicated to this. And they've joined a public-private partnership with the professor so they can essentially amplify their knowledge and their insights to try and really get around this problem and then reduce these cardiotoxic side effects in the potassium channel. So that's a sort of another example, but there are many more I could reel off. One thing I will say, actually, another point just to share about where public-private partnerships can be very powerful is I observe either in our labs and definitely in amongst our engineers in our manufacturing plants, in that they may come across a technology that's been developed by a university or even by a university and another a company.
Mm-hmm.
And there's an interest in, maybe you want to invest in that technology or acquire that technology or procure it, but we're not sure yet how it fully works. So a way to kind of test it is again through a public-private partnership, where we have a public-private partnership agreement with the university. Maybe if there's a third party involved, they're also part of that agreement. And we use that technology, say in our manufacturing plant, and the technology might be, this is how we can reduce the use of single-use plastics. And we apply that technology, and then over the course of that public-private partnership agreement, it could be 6 months or 12 months or 18 months, we can really determine, is this working for us? Is this really making a difference? And then if it is, we may be interested in well, should we maybe invest and acquire this technology? Or actually, are there ways that we can continue the public-private partnership to improve it and elevate it to even higher level? And so this is another smart way where you can sort of look for efficiencies to gain without sort of taking the risk of, I'll buy and hope it works.
Right.
Or I won't buy because I'm worried it won't work, but then you miss out altogether. So again, a very powerful way where PPPs can make a big difference.
Yeah, that's quite interesting because we've heard quite a bit lately about you sort of what you're describing, sort of the scalability issue when you do have something as promising as that, and nonetheless, at the end, J&J is very big, and to get to the scale that you require, and obviously getting through that, whatever you want to call that manufacturing scale up valley of death or whatever. We don't normally think about that when we're talking about drugs, but yeah, I mean it's that's a rather elegant concept and another interesting way for as you were saying, for public-private partnerships to show their value. So then that's really neat. Mark, what else is coming? I mean, I know that you get out to a lot of these conferences in areas of EU health and medtech summits and all that. What's coming up for the rest of the year that we should know about that's public facing as we get to the end of 2025 into 2026? Other public facing initiatives, conferences, talks that you're going to be involved in? Anything else that I missed while we have you today, please?
Yeah, no, it's I think there's an interesting point if you think about both in Europe and in the US, when governments are looking at research agencies and the role of public-private partnerships, that there needs to be an appreciation that public-private partnerships kind of everyone wins and gains, if you like.
Okay.
I've described advantages that we've got as a company, and I think where public-private partnerships are our strategic tool and approach you should have amongst your other approaches to innovation. But I think from a sort of social or society viewpoint, they really help build knowledge and capabilities in your wider society and in your wider ecosystem. And I think that's an important point that we've, in Europe, for example, we'll be looking to host a sort of round table discussing about the importance of public-private partnerships to European policymakers. And the reason for that is that in Europe, they've got their new big research framework decision to be making over the next 12 to 18 months, for which, and this research framework will go from 2028 to 2035.
Okay.
And there's what you're for life sciences, the increased competition now is for more public-private partnership effort to be in the defense space because of some of the volatility that we see.
Right.
And actually, it's really important that we're not sort of sacrificing life science and health research as a result of that. So that's an important topic for consideration as well, which we've got coming up. And as I said, across all of our sort of research domains and in both pharmaceutical and medtech, yeah, multiple different projects. I think in our medtech area, robotic surgery and the role of artificial intelligence in the operating room is going to be a really interesting, fascinating area. And I also think in pharmaceuticals, the role of artificial intelligence in pharmacovigilance and monitoring and testing sort of patient safety on the market, if you like, is going to really sort of help up our game. And again, public-private partnerships are going to be a very powerful mechanism to do that. You can bring together different companies, different stakeholders, different agencies. So I look for that on the horizon and see that as really very important as well. One topic I didn't sort of mention actually earlier on, but it's important your listeners are aware of this. But also when you're doing these public-private partnerships, I mentioned about the project management capabilities and the legal capabilities, in addition to understanding the science and how the agencies work and how to apply to the agencies, but also understandably, and I fully support this, because these are public-private partnerships, the public part, the government agencies part, okay, now and then need to audit and check, hey, have you private partners use these public, if you like, taxpayer-owned assets for the right reasons?
Right.
So of course you can have compliance checks and audit checks, and I welcome that. That's important to shine a light on the fact they're being used in the right way. I think it's also an important reputation driver. And so you need to ensure that you have that audit and compliance capability within your organization. So when these questions come along, you're ready to answer them, have processes in place to provide rapid answers. And that's an important piece to remember as well.
No, it's again, your group sounds like a fun place to be in the organization, just thinking about the scope of what you're involved in and the nature of these programs. But I'm excited for you. I look forward to continue to follow what the group does and how it moves forward with several of these programs. I'll have my eye obviously on the neurodegeneration and the space sciences, but really great stuff, Mark. It's really impressive. Again, for everybody out there that's going to be listening to this episode across the various podcast networks or who will be watching on the YouTube channel. Again, you've been spending time with Dr. Mark Lloyd Davies, Global Head, Strategic Partnerships and Resource Group, Johnson & Johnson, doing really amazing things and crafting these public-private partnerships to accelerate R&D, to increase access for patients, and ultimately, as they say, unlock possibilities to transform lives. Mark, again, I want to thank you for walking us through your program, everything you're up to there at J&J. Thank you for all you do to move these types of programs forward. And as we like to say on our show, thanks for helping to create a better tomorrow for all those patients out there via the innovative stuff you do. Really, really a great story.
Great. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation. It's been fantastic to have the conversation with you. I feel like we could keep going for longer and longer and longer in many ways with new ideas and thoughts, but it's been great to share this time with you, and thank you for showing an interest. So I really appreciate it.
Great having you. Great having you.